Okay, so now we're going to discuss the second part of the worksheet. And remember, to minimize your distractions, go someplace where it's quiet, where you're alone, hopefully, so you can watch this video, put away your phone, because I'm going to be covering important information that you're going to want to be paying attention to in order to succeed in this class. So we finished questions 1 and 2. Question 3, on pages 48 through 51, McLuhan discusses writing and printing. Write a couple sentences in your own words to explain one personal or social effect McLuhan attributes to writing and or printing. So I'm going to go now to the pages where he covers that. And I'm going to start here on page 48 and 49. And I'm going to draw your attention to over here on the right-hand side of the page where it says printing a ditto device, printing a ditto device. That might not mean a whole lot to you guys because I'm assuming you're young enough that you're not familiar with what a ditto device is. A ditto device basically was a copier. So before Xerox came in onto the scene and made electric copy machines, there used to be these manual copy machines that people would use in order to make exact duplicates, multiple exact duplicates of, a text. And so what printing does is it, changes the scale, pace, or pattern of people's lives, specifically readers' lives, because, if you look back at the beginning of texts and the way that they were produced by monks. And they were produced by monks hand copying texts. And of course, because monks were creating these books, the only thing that was available to read were religious texts. And with the creation of the printing press, which happened in the 16th century in Western culture, it happened earlier in Eastern culture, but in Western culture, which is what, McLuhan is principally referring to, starting in the 16th century, you were able to take a text that had been written and mechanically typeset it and reproduce that text over and over and over and over again. And because this technology was available to people who weren't just monks, what happens is a couple of things. One, texts are created that are not simply religious in nature. That's huge. So people were able to read texts, duplicates of texts that were about subjects other than religion. It changes the way that people think about their world. Think about also the way it changes the scale, pace, or pattern of their lives. It changes the scale because you're able to hear and read and pay attention to the thoughts of somebody who is not immediately in your proximity, somebody who's not in front of you talking. You're able to, read the thoughts of somebody who lives far away and possibly also somebody who lived a long time ago. So this radically changes the scale of someone's life. It also changes the pace of somebody's life because they have to master the art of reading, which literacy rates were pretty low before the printing press was invented and really accelerated after the printing press was invented because they needed the populace needed access, an ability to read texts that their priest or their minister couldn't read to them. It also changed the pattern of people's lives, again, because they would need to set aside time not only to master this technology, this ability to read the printed alphabetic language, but they would also need to set aside time in their day to do so. And so this idea that people could, in isolation, they would, retreat with a book and have a conversation with a book, really altered the scale, pace, and pattern of people's lives. And you'll see here that McLuhan, in a way that's a bit hyperbolic, he overstates the case, says the goose quill put an end to talk. Now, people used to write with goose quills before fountain pens and before ballpoint pens. You would actually use a goose's feather and, dip it in ink and then write on paper with that. And it didn't actually put an end to talk. We're talking right now. You talk all the time. And he says it abolished mystery. That's not exactly true. Like, there's lots of mysteries in life. But nevertheless, like, what it did was it gave you access to other people's lives, and it created a necessity to create a community with people outside of your own house, outside of your own family. So this is why he says things like it gave architecture in towns. It brought roads and armies, bureaucracy. So in other words, the ability for the common people to be able to write down their thoughts, to reproduce those thoughts, to decimate those thoughts widely, then created a need for people to work together in a community as opposed to being really focused on what's happening inside of their own homes or inside of their own village, inside of their own tiny town. And so the printing press is a ditto device that reproduces other people's thoughts in an exact manner, but it had far more reaching repercussions than just that. It changed our culture. It changed the way we lived our lives. It changed the scale, pace, and pattern of our lives. So McLuhan goes on to say it was the basic metaphor with which the cycle of civilization began. And I really think he's true, based on the idea of the civilization and the way that we think of it now, which is a civilization based on common human rights, wherein people might have their own, religious ideas, but that's not sort of the basic principle of how we live our lives. Instead, we think that people have autonomy, that they have a right to privacy, even though, that's not legally protected, and that we can live together in some form of harmony, even if we disagree with one another, because we, due to the printing press, have had access to the people's thoughts, and that's led us to the belief that even though people may differ from us, that they have the right to those thoughts. And so it does really change the scale, pace, or pattern of our lives. Again, I'm going to keep repeating this because it's really, really important. So hopefully this section will now make more sense to you. On here on the right, we have the original Latin in which most texts were printed, and because that was the language of the church. But due to the printing press, people started printing in the vernacular, which is your local language. And so the church's language became not the only language in which printing was, acceptable. People started printing in French and German, and again, we're talking Western culture, in Polish, in English. And so man could now inspire and conspire. And it's no accident that it was after this invention in the 16th century that suddenly the only church wasn't the Catholic Church, that there became many splinter churches that broke off from the Catholic Church. There was the Protestant Reformation. And then also, if you spin this out logically, that's also the backbone of American independence when we broke away from Great Britain, as well as the leading to the French Revolution. This idea that the church wasn't the only person who got a say in how people's lives were lived, and that the monarchy wasn't the only person who had to say how lives were lived and what thoughts were thought, because regular people were able to write down their thoughts and reproduce them and then circulate those thoughts, and individuals were able to read them in their own country, in their own time, and or later. And so this idea of independence, of freedom for all, of life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness, those caught fire. And so that's what he's referring to here. The power of detachment and non-involvement also came in because you could, sit in your corner and say, I'm just going to think about this a little bit, and I'm going to read my text. I'm going to be an individual. I'm going to escape into the words of somebody else. So there's lots of ramifications of the invention of the printing press. And so I hope that this has really helped you to understand the worksheet and prepared you for the quiz. So I hope you listen quietly and attentively, and that you had yourself focused and you're put down your phones. Good luck.